Okay, well, welcome everybody to this update from the CCBC team in Beijing and Shanghai. I think probably most of you know me. I'm Sarah Kutulakos. I'm the Executive Director of CCBC. CCBC is very lucky among business councils to have offices outside of Canada. And we've had our Beijing office since 1980 and our Shanghai office since 1994. And we're even more fortunate that those offices are led by two really great people, Noah Fraser and Edward Dai, both of whom many of our members have come to rely on quite heavily. So today we bring you Noah and Edward from China for an update on what's happening in China. First of all, a housekeeping detail. Make sure you keep your microphone on mute to reduce background noise. I'm pretty sure all of you are automatically muted, but just a reminder. When we are ready to take Q&A, we'll ask you to write your questions in the chat box. If you have any administrative issues, Aude Verneau is on the call, and she's supporting us on this event, and you can always chat directly with her if you have any technical issues. Also, be aware the session is being recorded. Now, many of you likely completed the business survey that we fielded in February, and next week we will launch the report for that. So watch for that in your events information online. The survey measures the impact of several factors on your business, including bilateral relations, the US-China trade war, and COVID-19. However, we fielded that survey just before COVID-19 became a global pandemic. So we suspect some of you might answer differently. And so we're going to take just 1 minute of today's poll, or of today's event, and do a quick poll. So I will load it here. And there are 3 questions. This will take you less than a minute. If you're doing it on your phone, sometimes holding it vertically works better. So I would ask all of you to just take a minute and look at these questions about your concerns about the coronavirus on your business. What is the time frame you think you will be back? And there's a second question I can't see. How big the impact is. So can you all see that poll? All right, we'll give it another couple minutes. I think we're about halfway there on the answers. And for any of you that just came in from the waiting room, we're in the process of doing a quick poll with 3 questions. And if you see them on your screen, please give us your answers. We'll give it about 30 more seconds. All right, last 10 seconds and then we'll close the poll. Okay, Thank you very much. We will share those that comparison of the results with what we heard in February when we do the main survey results next week. So now I would like to introduce Noah Fraser, CCBC's Managing Director in Beijing, and he will talk to us about China's market and policies. Take it away, Noah.
All right, thank you, Sarah. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names and faces. It's been a while since I've got a chance to see you guys. As Sarah mentioned, I'm based here in Beijing, and I've been here on the ground for the entirety of the COVID issue, call it what you will. My colleague Edward is going to address a couple of case studies after I give you a very brief kind of overview. I'm sure some of this will be old hat for a few of you, but it may be interesting to hear some of the anecdotal pieces of the puzzle and give you a bit of a sit rep of where we sit today at the end of April. So I hope you can all see my screen. I'm just going to try to advance the slides. Here we go. Perfect. All right. So as you can see here, you know, in the basically the height of the Spring Festival, which was late January this year, the coronavirus outbreak officially kind of took hold of China, and Beijing was one of the worst hit cities. Obviously, Wuhan is the epicenter, but Beijing was pretty badly affected. The whole country, of course, went down for several weeks. We're talking about the largest economy by many measures. And when you've got zero travel and 95% of businesses are closed and on reduced hours, it's difficult to express how surreal it was here on the streets of one of the world's biggest cities, where you could ride your bicycle down the middle of the third ring road, and if that means anything to any of you, it's sort of an indication of how little was happening here. We have a member of our staff that actually stayed in their apartment for 7 weeks to avoid exposure to the coronavirus epidemic. Now, slowly but surely, the country kind of kicked in some digital controls. I'm sure you may have heard of some of these, where we've got WeChat app tracking, where you're linked to your mobile carrier, and effectively what happens is that based on your travel and where you've been in China, you're given a green, yellow, or red code, and that effectively is linked to what you're allowed to do and what you're not. And red basically means you're going directly to quarantine. Who knows where you really go? And then yellow, you've got to go home and stay there for a couple of weeks. And green effectively means that you have no abnormal conditions, according to the English translation on the app anyway, which is always nice. I've managed to maintain a green code for the entirety of the last several months, so I've been able to go in and out of my office every day. As you can see on the right, there's a photo of the CCBC Beijing office. That's our entryway right there. So obviously there's some tech that's gone into this, where you've got a guy in a hazmat suit, and there's a screen there that's effectively measuring my temperature as I take a photo of myself in it. These measures have been in place for several months. I personally have been back in the office since February 10th. So it's been quite some time that you've been able to maintain some degree of a normal life in China. Obviously, things have taken a very slow turn, but if you look at that middle picture, you can see that certain communities are very well sort of guarded. You've got some security guards there that are checking temperatures and requiring registration. If you are not a resident, you often can't enter, which caused a lot of the businesses that were inside of these communities to go under, because it was only residents that could go in and out. The control measures of movement have been pretty intensive compared to what I understand is happening in Canada. So, today we've got activity on the streets, we've got traffic, we've in my opinion, got some really good indicators of the domestic market really coming back to life in many ways. As you can see here, you've got some revenge spending, you've got revenge tourism. This was a couple of weeks ago on the right. You've got the intensive tourism at Huangshan, that's a yellow mountain. And as soon as some of the restrictions on travel were lifted from the Shanghai area, there were some pretty serious outbound travelers to some of China's more popular domestic destinations. Up until midnight of last night, I was not allowed to leave Beijing. So that restriction has just been lifted today, which was wonderful. So I would be able to go to Shanghai now, or really anywhere in China that's considered a low-risk zone, and not have to quarantine for 14 days in a government-approved hotel upon my return. Now, that does not apply, unfortunately, to most of you on the call tonight, or this morning, I should say, because your international travel remains off the table. Obviously, with a foreign passport, you're non grata in China, you can't get in, and even those with diplomatic passports are being asked not to enter, or at least delay their return until mid-May. In terms of the economy, there are a lot of different ways of looking at it, but the general consensus is that things are back online to the tune of about 80%. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's measured. The uptick and my cautious optimism comes partially from a few indicators that are broadly accepted as being pretty good harbingers of good things to come. The 2 sessions of the Lianghui has been rescheduled to May 22nd. This is a major political showpiece of the Chinese Communist Party that happens every year, and it was supposed to be on March 5th, but they've kicked it out to May 22nd. It had not been rescheduled until just a couple of days ago. 3,000 or so people from the party come in from all over China to join these meetings in the Great Hall of the People, and so they want this to be, mask-free and smooth and not causing any further outbreak. Obviously, my optimism is cautious for a lot of reasons. This economy was absolutely smashed over the rocks. Unemployment is very high, and again, you've got to take numbers with a grain of salt, but based on, again, anecdotal evidence and some think tanks, et cetera, that are looking at these numbers, there are a lot of people that are out of work right now. Offshore demand shocks with the Western markets now going through what China was going through a couple of months ago are not buying like they were, outside of PPE, of course. You've got insolvencies here in the country. You've got a lot of vacancies that are kicking up. A lot of businesses are still closed. Anecdotally speaking, again, at the CCBC in Beijing, we've got 8 businesses that rent space from us on our floor, and 3 of them are open. We're one of them, and the lights are off and nobody's home at most of the others, and they have not been back yet. So there's a pretty strong indication from a lot of places that this has been a little bit more this has been a bit more devastating than people realize. Of course, then there's also the anti-China rhetoric coming out of the U.S. There's a lot of threats coming from all over. What I would say also is there's an interesting number that came out about a week ago from the National Bureau of Statistics with a 6.8% contraction in China's economy. This is the first time that the Chinese economy has actually shrunk on a quarterly basis in over 30 years. It was not easy, I'm sure, for them to come up with these numbers, but at least we know that they're sticking to some degree of logic. What that means in some ways is that it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Xi administration to live up to their 2020 poverty eradication goal. So they've got to kick up some pretty strong numbers in the second 3 quarters. So look for those as the months go on. There'll be some pretty significant infrastructure spending to finance that. There's going to be a lot of, or expect some financial sector reforms that, to increase FDI, which China is going to be in dire need of over the coming months. And so that's on the politics or the political and economy side. As far as business and trade goes, if you're in the e-commerce game, you're very lucky. We had a 30% kind of year-on-year activity buzz that kicked in from fall, or pardon me, spring of last year over to this year. A lot of that spending has been, I mean, it's not illogical, right? You've got a lot of people that are sitting at home, they're stuck, they're on their mobile phones, they're going to shop. And a lot of that is coming in the form of vitamins, nutraceuticals, exercise equipment. There have been like triple-digit increases in purchases of those goods. Not a terrible business to be in. And we have a couple of members that are actually in that world. Real estate sales, however, are down by about 30 to 35% year on year. Obviously, commercial is going to be a big part of that. And so that alludes to the idea that there's going to be a fair amount of thirst for new tenants and for new buyers on across the entire country. In terms of the Canada-China issues that are ongoing, and again, of course, people, I hate to remind you that the Canada-China relationship was not in a perfect condition before coronavirus hit. So this is something that you're probably already quite aware of. Canola exports are permitted officially up to a 1% dockage level. The largest producers in Canada, unfortunately, are not able to meet that 1% dockage level from a cost-effective perspective. So it's too onerous for them to reach that number. So they're still not shipping to China. However, pork and beef exports are up in a big way. And once the issue with the fraudulent licenses was kind of solved, and the Chinese recognized that was an issue that we addressed, the exports kicked back in hard. And what I would say is that obviously a lot of that had to do with the culling of the swine in terms of swine flu here, but one way or another it worked out well. Now, opportunities in this crisis, I mean, I'm not going to rattle on too much. I'd really like to leave as much time as we can for Q&A, and we can get into some specifics there if possible. But you can look, if you're renting space in China, now might be a pretty good time to talk to your landlord about next year's lease or the year after that, because a lot of these companies that have gone under are not paying rent anymore. And landlords are going to be pretty desperate to get new clients that are willing to pay in. And so we're seeing and we're advising a lot of companies to take an aggressive stance on the extremely high rent rates in major cities like Shanghai and Beijing. Another opportunity I believe right now is hiring in China. You've got a large diaspora of talent that's been laid off or is unfortunately unable to work because so many of these companies have been unable to maintain operations. Many of you are small businesses, and I can't imagine that a lot of you would be able to survive 3 months without any revenue. It's a pretty difficult pill to swallow, and so a lot of good people have been laid off, and so there's a fair amount of hungry employees out there. This is going to be the absolutely most active economy, and it is already in many ways the most active economy regardless of COVID, but this is the most active economy in the world, and it will be for at least the next several months. There's no sign of any other major country coming close to what we're seeing in China right now in terms of consumption and in terms of stimulus. Again, as I mentioned earlier, financial sector reforms are going to be kicking in. There are new opportunities for licensing and new opportunities for private equity firms to crack this market. As I said, FDI and inbound cash are in demand here. Online, obviously, there's been no time like the present in terms of the e-commerce and online companies engaging and taking on a larger role in Chinese society. Many of our experts in the field are saying this is the largest wealth transfer in history, where you've got a lot of people in traditional industries that are now going into a whole brave new world of online opportunities, and that's especially apparent here in China. And then finally, of course, if you've been experiencing supply chain challenges, the China Plus One strategy, it might be the time to look at that. We have a couple of members that were very intelligent and were able to open up manufacturing facilities in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. And while their supply chains are still dominated in China, they didn't suffer from the labor shortages when all of the migrant workers were stuck at home for those first 60 days or so. So there's definitely some risk management and some hedging that can be done. And obviously that's the direction that if you are in a manufacturing intensive industry, that's probably where things are going anyway. But we believe that the supply chains will still continue to reside in China. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Edward for a couple of kind of in-depth case studies of ways that we've assisted and some of the more interesting stories that we've heard over the last couple of months. And I'll come back to you shortly. Edward, it's all yours.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is my privilege and honor to see so many familiar names and faces in this webinar and share with you what I have learned from the communications with members over the past several months, just to give you a general sense of what some of our members have been doing here in China. Now, as you know, like CCBC serves a variety of members that represent a large number of sectors, varying from consumer goods, heavy industries, education, professional services, and some of the government agencies. Members have confronted various challenges during the time of trouble and plunged all resources possible into the battle against the virus. Of all the inspiring experience I've learned, the effective communications with partners and stakeholders seems to be the common approach to collaboratively tackling the difficulties. So just in short, it's never a one-man game. CCBC has been delighted to facilitate, enhance those communications and witnessed some valuable outcomes. So unlike Noah's micro view of what's going on here, I'm going to zoom in to two specific cases to elaborate on the subject of communication. Now, the first one was when China was the epicenter in earlier February. One of the Atlantic seafood companies respectively decided to support the Chinese people by providing financial aid. We are very proud to get involved. But it didn't take long for the local management team to discover that to actually support the product is more considerate and helpful than the monetary donation. So with the assent to the idea, and CCBC reached out to the local Wuhan, the Wuhan local government, and offer the option on the members' behalf. But just within hours, we came to realize that the municipal government's daily necessity supply scheme only include some of the absolutely indispensable goods like rice, cooking oil, noodles, and vegetable. Now, fresh and live seafoods were difficult to coordinate and to be distributed to communities. As the food service sector was completely disrupted due to the city lockdown. So having widened the communication with other stakeholders and an alternative emerged. It is to work with a renowned fresh food e-commerce platform with an in-house food service team to produce lunch boxes with those seafood and deliver them to the doctors that work in the key hospitals via the home delivery network operated by this particular e-commerce company. So just in a week, some 500,000 RMB worth of seafood were nicely cooked and delivered to those who are actually fighting in the front line of the battle, which was highly appreciated by the local medical care team and the local government. So that's the first case. Now the second one was actually about communication in the course of the business resumption. One of the largest Canadian athletic apparel brands with about 40 stores in China ran into some operational challenges to resuscitate its commerce. So I need to depict some context before going into the actual story. The retail sector in China witnessed a gradual store reopen pace following the major manufacturing industries in late February. The government set stringent rules for organizations to restart the operations, including having enough PPEs, protective schemes approved for employees. Now, in the manufacturing cases, factories need to have food and water prepared for the entire personnel inside their establishments in case that possible lockdown occurred upon the confirmed cases reported. Now, this particular case illustrates how effective and powerful, well, to some extent, arbitrary the Chinese government acted in the course of this campaign against COVID-19. In order to get all the stores reopened in early March, the Canadian company placed an order of 10,000 N95 masks with a factory recommended by the local district government, with which the Canadian company registered its WUFI many years ago. Now, to its great disappointment and astonishment, the factory was completely expropriated by the local government without prior notification, and all the masks it produced were simply confiscated 1 week before the reopen date. It left the Canadian company with fewer chances, especially in late February, where when the PPEs in China is still in great shortage. Obviously, the company can't afford to keep the stores closed simply because of the shortage of PPE products. They turned to us for immediate support. Now, CCBC by that time has been in close communication with Shanghai Municipal Government's Commission of Commerce since the business resumption program started in middle of February. Now, just for a reference, CCBC is one of the 4 Canadian NGOs recognized here and registered its rep office under the Chinese legal framework. Now, the Shanghai Commission of Commerce is the supervisory unit of our Shanghai chapter. The same is true of Beijing in Noah's place. It is crucial for them to support all businesses that look to recuperate in response to the central government's call for action. So an immediate call and paper report was sent to the right desk after we learned the challenge from the member. So beyond our most optimistic expectation, the municipal government responded to this request by providing 10,000 N95 masks at 4 RMB a piece for the members' national-wide reopen within 24 hours. So on one hand, all the masks ordered were simply confiscated, while on the other, you get it back at a cheaper price. So, and one of their staff went to pick up an emergency form signed, chopped by the local government, and then settled the shipment at the factory, at a warehouse located in the outskirts of Shanghai on the same date, just to slake the urgent demand for PPEs used to kick off the reopen. So it is also the first time that I've ever seen a Chinese an emergency form with that red head. Now there are hundreds of thousands of government-led actions during the course of the battle. Some turned out to be a bit ambivalent. So that being said, an effective communication with the right stakeholder could actually get things moving much faster under the critical circumstances. But there are also other interesting cases that I would like to share that CCBC participate and being part of it. But I just don't want to dominate the session by just parting information at my own discretion. So I'll pass it to Noah. Just feel free to raise questions if you have some. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah. So obviously, we've been pretty deeply involved with some I guess you'd call them pretty challenging moments for a lot of Canadian firms. Obviously, accessing PPE has been obviously for the government anyway. The embassy team here and their and the remaining folks that are deemed essential in the consulates have been working around the clock on this issue, as I'm sure many of you are reading in the media. It's not overstated. There is a very strong contingent of people that has been sort of redeployed to sourcing masks and hazmat suits and gowns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are folks that are often on the immigration teams, et cetera. So it's all hands on deck on that front. But obviously we've been able to be surgical on some fronts and be able to really kind of cut right to the core of things and get some problems solved. Very briefly, I want to get over to Q&A, but I wanted to ensure that you're all aware of ways that you can use CCBC while we're here. I mean, Edward and I are behind the wall, so to speak, and the likelihood of travel into China for executives is probably pretty far off. We don't want to make any predictions. I hope that I'm wrong, but the likelihood is low, as China is still relatively uncomfortable with what's happening in the rest of the world. We have a terrific incubation and proxy program here, where you can really extend into China without having to set foot in the country at all. The anecdote I usually like to use is that a partner at a law firm or a CEO of a company is going to come to China maybe quarterly and fly business and stay in a 5-star hotel for 10 to 12 days while they visit 4 or 5 cities. For that price, the CCBC can actually hire a full-time staff for you and co-locate them in our office without you needing a legal entity on the ground here. We're very happy to engage with you on that. There's a few details obviously involved, but this can be a person that can work for you in China on China time, and would be very pleased to and we'd be very pleased to talk you through some of that. It's a solution that's already working for several companies here, and I can't say enough for the ROI on that program. We also obviously can help with interpretation. We do supplier visits. We will come up with pretty much whatever creative solution you need us to come up with, or at least we'll certainly give it a try. And we don't like to say no without providing an alternative. Another really useful program that we've done in the last couple of months surrounding e-commerce has been market scans. So what we do is, well, I'll give you an example. A company out of BC that makes a sort of personal care product wanted to list onto Taobao, and they, which is sort of an Amazon-esque platform here, one of several. And what we did for them was did several SEO sort of searches, figured out whether they were already being sold in country. We identified whether or not they were being knocked off. We tried our best to give them competitive pricing and what was, what's in market and what's not already. And using that information, they were able to decide price point. They were able to decide whether it was going to be a valid or a doable exercise. And ultimately, they decided it was. They've listed products online now using a TP or a Tmall partner that we were able to help them vet and identify. And they are and their sales are doubling almost quarterly. So very strong sort of start for this company that had no idea what they were doing in China. And in fact, they were already being sold here, but the markup was so massive that they were able to undercut the people that were wholesaling. So some good opportunities here. I'm sure you have questions. We're happy to answer, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to moderate our Q&A today. Thank you very much.
I have unmuted myself. Sorry about that. Thanks to both Noah and Edward for those updates. And if we have time at the end, maybe Edward can give us a few more of his case studies. But we do have some questions that have come in. In fact, the same question has come in from a couple of members that are in the technology sector. And basically, it's, can we travel from Canada to Beijing and Shanghai and avoid being put into quarantine? And are there ways for key technology people to visit? And I know I've seen some things about South Korea and Singapore negotiating about these things, but where do we stand on people coming in and out, whether they are just business people like us traveling from Canada, or even Canadians with residents that may be still outside China?
Ed, I'm happy to field that one to start. Bad news. You're not really allowed in. So my case, had I left China and the measures that were implemented on March 28th, I believe it was, surrounding a effective blockage of all foreigners coming in, but for very, very specific exceptions. I'm a resident of Beijing. I don't have a home anywhere else. I'm on a foreign passport, but I have a 3-year residence permit that identifies me as living in China. That would not have got me in the door. The only real in right now, and they're actually being dissuaded, is somebody with a red passport. So diplomats are able to re-enter. However, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has basically directly told them they would much prefer if nobody came in before May 15th. And despite that, I know several diplomats that have come back in, but they are required to quarantine either at home or in a, if you were able to make it in ahead of the deadline, you would be forced to quarantine in a hotel selected by the Chinese authorities at your own cost for 14 days. And it was a varying sort of degree of comfort that you were offered depending on where you ended up, where you live oftentimes too. So I know that there have been, when they first released the policies, there were some exceptions, some notable exceptions, but to the best of my knowledge, those have been extremely few and far between in terms of successful cases of people actually being able to get a special visa to be able to come into the country. The blockage is pretty black and white, unfortunately.
Well, and you know, from week to week, things may change. You know, until yesterday, you couldn't leave Beijing. So we'll keep an eye on that. And that's something where if members have individual issues around that, come and see us, because we have been trying to work with appropriate government authorities to solve individual problems. We've got some very interesting questions coming in. The first one is, what are you hearing from Canadian companies with joint ventures as to whether their Chinese partners have failed? Are they running into problems with suppliers not being able to fill orders, affecting the JV's ability to continue manufacturing?
Edward, do you want to take that one?
We didn't hear any about that, but just I don't have much information on that.
Okay.
I would agree. I think that there are probably companies that, you know, we don't always get the information. There are a lot of individual firms that are operating in China that we aren't even aware of course. And, you know, the JV structure has become less and less popular, especially in manufacturing. In the last several years, most companies that operate here are either a representative office or a wholly foreign-owned entity. That being said, there are a lot of Chinese companies that have failed, and we'd be very interested to hear more about that particular case. If you want to get in touch with Sarah and I and Edward directly, we might be able to dig in and find out what's actually happening on the ground with that Chinese company. We do that regularly. We make phone calls, and now that we can actually travel again, we would even consider doing visits to see if the doors are locked or whatever it is, right? So we're happy to try to stopgap wherever possible.
Well, and that
sorry, Sarah. Just to answer that. Well, from the legal point of view, that the JV and the Chinese investors are separate in China. So when you say the Chinese party failed, if it's the investing company, the parent company, Chinese parent company, it shouldn't have like direct relation or influence on the joint venture. Joint venture means that it's an independent legal entity managed by its own staff, and this, appointed by the board. So the management is fully responsible for day-to-day operation. It shouldn't it won't and shouldn't be affected by this Chinese stakeholder on the day-to-day management level.
Okay, thanks. And we can keep in touch with this person who asked the question on it. You know, we touched on the fact that you can't really travel to China to do this all-important business development and relationship building. And one of the participants asks, we're talking a lot about propping up our company's ability to digitize, but are Chinese executives willing to develop online relationships to lead to agreements? So I think this kind of relates to that bridging function of how do we keep operating, getting to the China market in this period where those face-to-face meetings aren't so possible. And what are you seeing on the China side in terms of receptivity?
Noah,
go ahead, Edward. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't want to generalize this, but just my recent talks with some of the members here in Shanghai, some truly inspiring news. The companies in the machinery sector, entertainment machinery sector, they managed to close a milestone deal just during this time of trouble with a fairly significant account in China. I mean, as this is like a heavy machinery purchase, so it involves in a lot of detailed discussion, blueprint, engineering discussion on the blueprint. So all this happened on this as you said, the digitalized communication. It is possible. It is. We've seen this as a successful case. Noah.
Yeah, I'll hop in, and I would echo Edward's optimism. I think absolutely there's no time like the present. I mean, digital relationships have never been more mature, and I certainly think that the Chinese side is going to be very receptive and open-minded in terms of how that looks. The idea of needing boots on the ground here at this point is not as firm as maybe it used to be. Especially if it's just a quick visit. You know, if you've got something that requires a larger build out, as I was saying earlier, using CCBC to actively represent you is an excellent sort of stopgap measure for that. But I would say that yes, optimistically, I would say that there's a lot of thirst for that.
Okay. Next question, I think, is probably Edward's. What is your expectation of this year's CIIE? For those of you who don't know the acronym, that's China International Import Expo in Shanghai. Does CCBC have any participation plan? And the question is because CIIE is the only all foreigners show, so health and safety issues are a big concern to everyone who's interested in the show.
Okay. Now, till now, the communication with the CIIE Bureau went well. The CCBC has been its official partner in a succession of 3 years. Again, the deadline for registration is today, but we've received official notice from the CIIE Bureau and the embassy, Chinese embassy in Ottawa, that some flexibility is still available. Earlier reservation are still viable. So it's still on the schedule, November 5th to November 10th in Shanghai, National Convention Center. According to the official announcement, 60% of space have been booked. So unlike previous years, like the CIIEs was completely sold out before April. We still have space for foreigners to participate, but the reaction to the CIIE, the third, apparently seriously affected by the COVID-19. And then with the reaction from the Chinese CIIE Bureau and the embassy, I probably can feel like it's been a tough time for them to expand the show.
Okay, so I'm going to combine 3 questions into one. It basically involves around product and people movement. So the 3 questions we got are the Chinese ports fully operational? What are domestic air traffic loads like? And are we currently able to export live shellfish into China for distribution to retail accounts?
I can take the first 2 parts of that. Edward may have better knowledge than I do, but we can certainly get back to you on the live shellfish piece. What I would say is ports are operational, but it depends how you look at it. Getting in and out of the port can be challenging, but it is relaxing big time, like week to week. The major mining companies that are exporting coking coal, for example, or nickel into China are all having 0 problems whatsoever. In fact, it's been, from what I've understood, easier. Air traffic, pardon me. So on the topic of the ports, getting product out of China is apparently, according to the people that I know that use both the port of Ningbo and the port of Shanghai, are both having no issues getting their products out. And this is container load consumer goods that are going to San Francisco, or pardon me, LA and Vancouver. Air traffic is a fraction of what it used to be. There are a lot of pretty interesting apps out there now that you can look at the number of actual planes that are in the sky. It's like I said, a small rounding error compared to what there usually would be in the skies over China. I haven't heard of anybody that I'm aware of getting on a plane in a very long time. There hasn't really been, like I said, until just today, a capability to leave Beijing. If you were, the general consensus in the city here was you were crazy to leave, because the tracking systems that are built into our cell phones would immediately alert the authorities as soon as you've gone and come back. So you could potentially move from a green to a yellow, and then you're sitting in your apartment for 2 weeks until you've proven that you're not COVID positive for having gone to Shanghai or wherever. On the topic of live shellfish, Edward may know off the top of his head, but we can certainly get you an answer on that. My expectation is that it's not a problem.
Let me enhance that seafood question before Edward speaks to it. We have another participant that says, we ship live lobster and frozen fish to China. One of our 2 brokers has completely disappeared and the other is very optimistic. And do you feel seafood imports will completely recover by September? So that's related to the previous question about exporting live shellfish into China for distribution to retail accounts.
Okay, just allow me to cut in from a different angle. Now, as said, the CCBC is a recognized NGO in China. We were invited to Shanghai Municipal Government's annual business updates led by a vice mayor. And of course participated by other authorities like port authorities in Shanghai early in April. So by that time, the port operation in Shanghai restored to normal, so early April. And one of the key indicator for the industry resuscitation is the electricity consumption. So by the end of March, the electricity consumption climbed back to 96% of the normal capacity, which means like the major industries and transportations has almost remained to its normal level. But the air transportation could be challenging in Shanghai, as the Shanghai Pudong International Airport has been a hub for the major sourcing hub for international PPE products. Most of the country is sourcing PPE product from the Pudong International Airport. So things going through Pudong would anticipate some challenge. Now, in terms of the seafood, I'll probably put it in a larger picture, because take Shanghai for an example. The Shanghai government has planned to roll out about 100 sales promotion and campaign, and turning some of the traditional festival into a sales spree in Q2. And some of our some of our Canadian members that have offices in Shanghai have been approached proactively by the district level Commission of Commerce, kind of advised or strongly recommend, and of course enticed by some financial incentives to participate in those sales spree, basically cut the price by a big percentage to boost the consumption. So I would say with this 100 plus sales campaign, both online and offline, the business will come back with probably even a revenged sales so up, because those needs didn't disappear, it just been delayed. However, when I talk with other members, like because some consumers are concerned with the economic recession that was brought in by this COVID-19. So some family big ticket expense like automobile could be protracted. But for import foods, it has always been a very appreciated product or a category for Chinese consumers. So I'm personally very confident in witnessing this coming back or even growing in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to get us through. There's some really great questions out here. I'm going to try to get us through a couple more before our time ends. So this one is around COVID-19 itself. So a couple of questions. Do you expect a second wave? Is the low number of reported cases in China really real? Like there's only 619 according to this questioner. And are antibody tests common? So I'll ask
Um,
one of you to take that and just give your opinion.
Yeah, Edward, I'll pick that one up. I'm probably a little bit more liberal in my thinking on this one. So, likelihood of second wave, they're doing their very best to prevent that by not letting you in. Because effectively, you guys are public enemy number one, being, you know, evil foreigners. You may have read about some anti-foreign sentiment in China. I personally haven't really experienced it. It's been pretty few and far between in terms of the examples. You know, this is a bit of a very clickable story in the media, so I think that it's a popular one to present. There have been, of course, some really nasty examples in Guangdong province, for example, that I won't go into here. But I think the likelihood of a second wave is possible because, to answer the second question, there is very little testing. Because if you test, then you know who has it, and it's easier not to know. So I know that instead of getting tested when you go into quarantine, they just put you into quarantine. And there was an example when about a week ago, the district of Chaoyang here in Beijing, which is the district in which I live, there were 4 new cases that were apparently brought in from somebody that had it, went into quarantine, and after the 14 days went out and infected a couple of people. So again, it kind of reminds us there's a lot that we don't know about this. But you know, these control measures that are still in place and have not really been, are being reduced slowly but surely, are there for a reason, and that is there's a deep fear of a second wave. And I'm sure that all of you have read about the genesis of the Spanish flu, and that's been widely quoted as a possible sort of template for how this might go. Antibody test kits are, I haven't seen one. I think they're being used. They were being used in the hospitals, but remember that those antibody test kits were not really even developed when this first hit Wuhan. So they've been slow. What I would say the major test facility is the handheld infrared scanners that they use on your wrist everywhere you go, virtually everywhere you go. I scan all over the place. Sometimes I'm 32 degrees Celsius, sometimes I'm 39 degrees Celsius. And then they scan me again and I'm 34. And so, you know, I won't dismiss it as being completely ineffective, but it's not exactly foolproof. So I hope that in a roundabout way answers some of your questions or adds some color to your understanding.
So I'm gonna move us on to what will probably be the last question. And those of you who have asked questions we don't get to, I know who you are, and we will email you afterward with some answers. You know, one of the takeaways I have is, although the use of apps and all the testing or all the, you know, checking of temperatures and everything seems fairly intrusive to us, people in China sort of feel like this is their lack of COVID and having gotten through this is hard won and worth the requirements, especially of wearing masks and things like that. And that's something that is really coming into play now in North America. Should people be wearing masks when? And if we do feel like wearing masks is an important part of re-entry, how do you get enough of them, given that even our medical personnel often can't get enough? So a question was asked about PPE, and have we been helping companies to educate them on, you know, if they have product that might not have Health Canada licenses, how they can get those licenses, and you know, how might Canada be able to even get enough PPE to open its retail stores and you know, other things that maybe don't currently require it. So I'll ask that one of Edward.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Now, we actually been coordinating these demands since I think middle March or late March, where the case I just mentioned, the Canadian renowned athletic apparel brand, and soon after they supply all the masks in their China stores, and then some of the stores in the neighboring countries like South Korea and Japan. It seems being a big shortage, and then look for suppliers. So in order to select those demands, we reach out to our network and get some really good vendors honestly, at the very beginning, they don't have Canadian certification. The prevailing certificates here are like the FDA and the CE for European unions. But with some of the initial instructions, these manufacturers are willing to coordinate those certification and then manage to supply the members with quantity of masks and PPE products. And then some of our members, the Chinese members, travel to Toronto, I think from Hong Kong in mid-February, and then they've coordinated some of the sanitizing product to Canada and donate it to the aged care houses. So we are able to make those links with the Chinese suppliers. Thank you.
Okay, so quite a few other questions. One that was asked was about CCBC's AGM in November 2020. We're currently looking at how we arrange our AGM and perhaps do it in 2 countries. So more to come on that. I'll address that question directly offline. Someone has asked if we can share the slides, and we're happy to do that. And we'll do a follow-up email to everybody on the call. Before we go, you're going to be seeing a lot of programming like this coming out from us in the coming months, including one next week on China's economy with Dan Koldick of the Canadian Embassy in Beijing. And we want to make sure that what we put on hits the sweet spot for members in terms of what you're interested in. So we're going to end today's session with a quick poll about which subjects are most interesting to you. So I'm going to load it here. And before you go, if you could just, click the ones that you think you would call into a cross-chapter call like this on. I think it's a great way to be able to get people together from all 7 of our chapters. And while I load that, I'd like to thank Noah and Edward for sharing their time and their expertise with us. And please know that you can always call on us to help with what you need, whether it be getting PPE or, how do I have a body that, how do I put a physical person in China, or how do you represent me for the couple months that I can't travel? We've seen some very interesting ideas on the chats here about CIIE and whether or not CCBC could represent a group of companies with our people on the ground. People like Noah and Edward that don't want to lose their green status. And we are very happy to get creative with members about whatever you need. This is an unprecedented time and is causing us to think about what are the things that we need to do to help keep Canada-China business going. You'll see next week at our survey some thoughts around the bilateral relationship, how that is impacting things. Another question was asked by a participant about sort of that that people-to-people relationship and how we can use emergency situations to improve goodwill in our relationships. So we'll talk more there about what's being done or needs to be done to build an overall Canada-China relationship, because that is very important to your business. So I believe that we are still a few polls going on. We will leave it open, and you guys are welcome to finish giving us your opinion. Thank you for that. We want to do programming that is useful to all of you. So thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day there. Thank you.